How's everybody doing today? So, before I get any further into this, I want to go ahead and just address an elephant in the room. My outfit is going to change several times throughout this video. We had to go back and reshoot some things for various reasons. I apologize if it breaks the illusion for anybody. I don't know what the illusion would be in this case, but if it's broken, I apologize. But today, we're going to be covering the Wisconsin Gubernatorial race between the current incumbent Republican governor, Scott Walker, and his Democratic challenger, the state superintendent of schools, Tony Evers. And his name is, in fact, pronounced Evers, despite the fact that I pronounce it Evers several times in this video. Guys, the Wisconsin gubernatorial race is a mess. When I was doing my standard research to do this video, I found that it's pretty easy to determine, without too much looking, that almost all the news coverage is coming from unreliable narrators. Now, kind of the interesting thing about this is that I wouldn't say it skews only to one side. There's definitely some unreliable narration going on either side. I just want to look, the biggest tool in my toolkit, the one thing that I always go to in every single race, the one thing that should be semi-reliable to at least give us a general idea of where a race sits and how the public opinion fluctuates over the time, is the polling data. And I want to explain to you, just as an example of how bad the coverage in Wisconsin is, why I chose to throw out every single poll except for one for various reasons. Alright, so first off, we start out with 10 polls to look at. Now, I do my standard trimming, which immediately removes any polls that are old, as well as any polls in which I have a newer polling result from that same polling agency. This ended up leaving us with 4. Now, one of those polls I eliminated right off the bat, right off principle, because it was conducted by the Democratic Party. I automatically throw out all polls conducted by either the Democratic or the Republican Party. The next thing I noticed was there was a consistent disparity between the NBC News polls and all other polls that were conducted within a week or two of them. This is true for both NBC News polls that I had, including the most recent one. That poll ended up giving me data that was 8 to 10 points off, and in both cases, they were incredibly off in favor of the Democratic candidate. So, again, this is as per a usual protocol that I use. Anytime that a polling agency's polls come off that skewed consistently, I throw them out. So that, in the end, leaves me with just 2 polls. Then I noticed something else. One of these polls, which comes from Marquette Law School, also had 3 other instances when we go back into older polling data. And we notice something else. In every poll that has been conducted by every polling agency, they all show the Democratic candidate ahead, Superintendent Evers. Now, the exception occurs 3 times, and it's in 3 out of the 4 Marquette University polls. 2 of them show Walker in the lead, and 1 of them shows the vote as a tie. So, although this isn't skewed so far off of the other results that it would immediately raise a red flag, I thought it was strange. So I decided to do a little bit of digging into Marquette University. Marquette University is a private Catholic school run by Jesuits. The school and its leadership has extremely traditional conservative religious beliefs. Now, Scott Walker, the Republican candidate, also has extremely traditional conservative beliefs. It just goes to show you how trying to be too specific and detailed sometimes when doing your research can actually backfire on you. But in the original cut of this video, I went into this whole spiel lining up statements Scott Walker had made and his religious beliefs with the beliefs of the Jesuits and Marquette University, totally overlooking the very simple and basic fact that Scott Walker actually went to Marquette University. So obviously, this both gives yet another path to why Marquette University wouldn't necessarily be the best polling source when it comes to polls on Scott Walker, and also reinforces and also explains probably the reasoning behind why his religious beliefs line up so succinctly with the Jesuits who in fact run Marquette University. Now back to me from the past. That leaves us with only one poll that I feel safe relying on, and that is a poll from Suffolk that ended on the 24th of August. That's kind of a long time ago. For those interested, the poll shows Evers, the Democratic candidate, ahead by 2 points. Now we come to another problem. In the absence of good polling data, in order to get to the bottom of covering this race, I am left with just looking at news stories and voter demographics and trying to come up with the best conclusions that I can based on what I can glean about the voting population and the candidates involved. This is where I come to my second huge roadblock. There are a few key details of their voting registrations that are not public record. In other words, there is no record of how many registered Republicans and Democrats there are in Wisconsin. This is one of the states where they're allowed to vote in either primary and things like that. Now, I did use a profile of how Wisconsin voted in other statewide elections to try and extrapolate to the best of my ability a general profile of the Wisconsin voter base. Wisconsin did elect Donald Trump in 2016, although not by a particularly huge margin. However, they also elected Barack Obama in 2012, this time by a much larger margin, although fair enough, in that race, Obama was the incumbent. They have both a Republican and a Democratic senator and a Republican governor. My best guess is that if I could get an accurate profile on Wisconsin voters, they lean just slightly right of center. Now, as far as candidates here, and their profiles, if we're going to try and match that up, the school superintendent, Tony Evers, seems to be moderate to heavy liberal. I wouldn't call him a moderate liberal, but I wouldn't really call him like an extreme socialist either. He is obviously in the education sphere and tends to have the most known policies when it comes to education, although that may have to do with the fact that in the past that was his job. So that's, when we look back at older statements he's given, that's usually what they would be about by necessity. Scott Walker, on the other hand, is a pretty hard right-leaning conservative. As I said before, he is pretty on to religious conservatism, even espousing a belief that he is against contraception. For those of you who don't know, this is something that is believed by more devout Catholics and Mormons and things like that, that even the use of birth control, even the use of a condom is unholy. But there are a lot of examples recently in this gubernatorial campaign of him kind of taking a more moderate stance on certain issues. To quote Mordecai Lee, who is a political scientist at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, he is really running as Mr. Moderate. It's not go big and go bold, it's been go small and go moderate. I don't know why, I just find that like a really kind of quaint and redundant statement. I will link an entire article here from governing.com, which is a pretty good source for articles and stuff like that on political issues. If you're interested in that, talking a little bit more about some of the more moderate positions or statements that Scott Walker has made. There is another interesting thing that I did want to point out as well, which is the lieutenant governor candidate for the Democratic Party. Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor is a man by the name of Mandela Barnes. Mandela Barnes is of African American descent, and he has absolutely doubled down on the narrative that all Republicans, and especially Donald Trump, are racist, that certain liberals have used. That Governor Walker was ignoring people who look like me, and said that Donald Trump wants to create a superior race. Listen, even if you buy into the narrative that Donald Trump is a racist, right? Even if you want to buy into that narrative, it's very clear that that latter statement is directly trying to invoke the image of Adolf Hitler. And that, to me, is pretty extreme. Now, this is a lieutenant governor candidate. How much do people listen to the lieutenant governor candidate compared to the actual gubernatorial candidate? I don't know, and I think your mileage may vary depending on the state and the year. But it's pretty clear to me that regardless of what the actual Democratic candidate for governor wanted, Barnes has definitely put this race in the contrast of one party leaning as far into their side of the political spectrum as they possibly can against Governor Walker, who seems to be leaning as much towards the middle as he dares without risking his actual voter base. And I think at the end of the day, with so little quantifiable data to base my assessment on, that's the key point that I'm going to hang on. And I'm going to go ahead and say that in keeping with my not trusting a lot of these polls here for the aforementioned reasons, I'm going to go ahead and call this race against them. I think that Scott Walker keeps his seat, 65% chance. I think that there is also a very slight, like maybe a 1% chance that this race actually turns into a Republican blowout. And that lays entirely on Mandela Barnes. I think that while we're seeing a lot of the actual politicians wanting to double down and lean into their own political parties and their own sides of the political spectrum. I think that for the most part, most of the voter base is a lot more moderate and a lot more tired of the bullcrap than the Republican and Democratic parties are giving us credit for. And I think that a lot of us know nowadays that for a lot of these politicians, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are way up here in importance, and the United States and its citizens are way down here. And I think a lot of us are tired of it. I know I am. But that's just my take on it, guys. Let me hear your take in the comments section. Like the video, please, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this election coverage. You guys have a great night. I'll see you in the next video, and peace.